Hello. If you have been joining us over the last few weeks, we have been looking at questions that Jesus asked to us or to his disciples or to people around him out of the book of John. We come to chapter 20. If you want to find that passage, we're going to look at just one or two verses that are there. We're headed into Christmas season about now, and when John tells the Christmas story, in some ways it's like his Easter story, and that is that there are some things that are not there. In John, there is not a trip to Bethlehem. There is not an innkeeper. There is not a donkey or shepherds or wise men or a manger. No stars, no Herod. None of that is part of John's story. In fact, he has a very, very simple statement. He says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." And that's his Christmas story. Well, his resurrection story probably tells a little bit more than that, but when you compare it to the other gospel writers, it is probably the most understated of all of them. Like the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John has Jesus appearing only to believers. They didn't easily understand the things that were happening. That happens in all of the gospel stories. When we come to chapter 20, the crucifixion is over. The disciples have scattered. Judas is dead. Peter is numb with guilt over the things that he had done in denying Jesus. Jesus' body has been placed in a borrowed tomb, and it has been sealed, and there are Roman soldiers who are standing guard in front of it. And then it's that Black Saturday, the Sabbath. It must have come and gone with a blur because travel was forbidden on such a holy day, and so they had to wait until Sunday morning in order to come and anoint the body. So Mary from Magdala did that very thing. She made her way to the tomb. We met Mary a while ago when Jesus had exorcised a number of demons, I think 7 demons from her, and had given her back her dignity by inviting her to become part of his family of followers and believers. So she arrived, but she didn't stay there very long. The guards were gone, the door was open. She looked in, she was afraid, the tomb was empty. She went and told Peter and John immediately. They came and also looked in and saw that the tomb was empty, and so they left. Mary, in the meantime, made her way back to the tomb. She looked in, and we're told very simply that she stood there crying. But through those tear-stained eyes that sort of make it cloudy on what it is that you're seeing, she saw a figure coming toward her. She thought it was the gardener. And in a very tender and a compassionate moment, this figure called her name, and immediately she knew who it was. Now, there have been other appearances between Jesus and his defeated disciples, but John tells us that Mary is the one who is remembered because she was the first to encounter Jesus face to face. What an unusual way to start off an Easter message, a tomb empty, Mary weeping, but she did weep. She wept because the one who had changed her life was gone, and she thought was gone forever. She was also remembering the agony that Jesus experienced on the cross and how she stood beside Jesus' mother, and they witnessed the entire thing from start to finish. She was also weeping because when she came to this place, the body was gone, and she thought that it had been stolen. So the question that Jesus asked, that he asked us to, is, he says, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" That's in verse 15. "Woman, why are you weeping?" Well, thinking it was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will go take him away." And that was when Jesus called her name, Mary, and she recognized his voice. "Teacher," she said in response, because she knew who he was. Well, she wiped away the tears and then went to tell the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." Why are you weeping? What does that question really mean? I believe it tells us that the risen Christ comes to us wherever it is that we are. For you see, the last thing that Mary expected in this whole situation was to see Jesus alive. Too much had already happened. She had seen it all. Things that were unfair, unjust, rigged, and wrong. Jesus had done no harm to anyone, so it's no wonder that she was crying. She cried for Jesus. She cried for herself. Maybe she was even crying for those other disciples, those who knew him. Well, John wants us to know that even if we do not recognize his presence, and Mary didn't, or even know who he is or that he's there. And Mary certainly didn't do that. Jesus comes to us wherever it is that we are. Jesus didn't say to Mary, Mary, you shouldn't cry. It's Easter. Be happy. Can't you hear the trumpets blowing? It's a brand new day. Instead, he asked her, woman, why are you weeping? And he does. He meets us right where we are. He met Thomas with all of his doubts, and he met Peter with all of his shame. And he met Mary with a heart that was so heavy she thought she was going to die herself. I know that holidays are hard for a lot of people, especially people who have known some great tragedies in their lives. They've little to celebrate. They don't want to go out and be around other people in public. They lose control of themselves and their tears with the very slightest of things. Maybe it's because there's been a divorce. Maybe it's because of a death. Maybe it's because there's a child who's in trouble. Or maybe it's because a business has failed. John says that Jesus comes to us right there, wherever it is that we are. Our pain is not brushed aside, and on that resurrection morning, there is room for tears and for aches and for blinded eyes that don't see things very clearly. Mary didn't know who she was talking to. She thought it was the gardener. But the pieces quickly fell together when he spoke her name and said, Mary. And she recognized that voice. It was the same voice that she had heard when those demons were exorcised from her body. It was the same voice that she recognized when Jesus stood outside the tomb of Lazarus in the town of Bethany and called him back to life. It was the same voice that she had heard when he was hanging on the cross, saying, Father, forgive them because they don't know what it is that they're doing. The good news of the resurrection is that it's a very personal message to each one of us. Our names are called. In chapter 10, verse 27, Jesus says, and John quotes him, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. You see, the one who knows our names is the one who calls us. And when he calls us also to a very great response. Moses found forgiveness on the day whenever his name was called. Samuel heard his name called, and he found his life vocation as a priest. Isaiah was in the temple when he heard his name called, and he assumed the role of a prophet. Nicodemus was visiting Jesus at night when he heard his name called and had the opportunity to have an abundant and an everlasting and an eternal kind of life in the middle years of his life. Nathanael heard the call and heard his name, and he also discovered that there was meaning and purpose awaiting for him if he would follow. And so now we come to this story of a very troubled woman who had 7 demons and who had met Jesus, and as a result of that, he called her by name and he brought her back to wholeness. Christmas is around the corner, and so it's not Easter, but we come to the manger. And for some of us, we come with tears in our eyes because Christmas is already different from Christmases that we have experienced in the past. Our gatherings are different, our worship is different, our shopping is different. All of our traditions, they really feel like that they are lost. And so through very blurred, tear-stained eyes, we might say, we also see a figure who meets us in the middle of that isolation and uneasiness, and he calls us by name. And we recognize his voice, and then we realize we're not alone. No matter how lonely or isolated we feel, we really are not alone. He's here, he always has been, and he always will be. Why? Because the Word became flesh and it dwelt among us. This Christmas, may you hear his voice and know that you're not alone either. Why are you weeping? Why are you crying? It's because I'm in a place that is so dark. It's a place where I need Jesus to come and meet me. And the good news of Christmas is that is the exact thing he does. So recognize his voice. Have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you next week.